Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's event, Green Card Trends webinar presented by Envoy. We'll get started right at the top of the hour in about 5 minutes. Thanks so much for joining. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning for some. I'm glad you could join us, and welcome to today's webinar, Green Card Trends, presented by Envoy. And for those of you on the call who aren't familiar with Envoy, we're the technology leader in global immigration. So ultimately, we enable employers to hire and mobilize their workforce across borders. So that's everything from navigating global immigration to securing the necessary work authorization here in the U.S., but also all around the world. And most importantly, especially in these times, to ensuring compliance by tracking and managing all of your sponsored workforce and employees. We do that by combining intuitive technology platform with great attorneys through our partnerships with firms like GIA, that ultimately we streamline the complicated work visa experience with that deep team of that legal expertise to bring really ease, efficiency, and transparency to the process. We do that for over 1,000 customers, ranging from fast-growing startups all the way up to the Fortune 50 to NHL hockey teams with players from all around the world. So I am Jamie Gilpin, and I'll do a quick introduction in a second, but wanted to do a few housekeeping items first. So this session is being recorded. We always get that question. We will share both the recording and the slides to you actually through the email, so you can reference that or share others within your organization. The presentation itself will probably last around 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes on the high side, and we will have time for Q&A. So if you do have a question, please put that in the right-hand side of your webinar experience screen there and put the question in, and then we will get to those towards the end of the program. So as mentioned, I'm Jamie Gilpin, excited to present, at least be part of the presentation of the webinar. I've been in the HR, human resources, and global mobility space for a while, definitely over a decade, and I'm just honored to be part of this great industry. Excited because part of my role here at Envoy is really understanding the trends, talking to a lot of companies. We also do an annual study with Nielsen Harris Poll that we commission to really understand benchmarks and hopefully really empower you as leaders with the right information to ultimately drive a better immigration program for your organizations, bringing peace of mind to your employees, but also efficiency to you and your teams. And so I'm even more excited to introduce my colleague, Allison Kranz, who is one of those great lawyers that we are honored to work with. She is Envoy's Immigration Solutions Partner, but prior to joining Envoy, she practiced immigration law as a managing attorney at Maney & Gordon, and also an associate attorney at Ogletree Deakins. So she has worked with hundreds of employers on corporate employment-based immigration, creating strategies, immigration policies, not too surprising, worked on green cards, which of course is why we are excited to have you here on our webinar today, Allison.
Hi, Jamie. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon.
So without further ado, we will jump in. Here is the agenda for our time together, and I love this webinar. We do this annually for a couple reasons. One, green cards are so critical to an immigration policy and strategy within an organization. When we talk about things that have changed over the last 12 months. One of the biggest driver of change within an organization is just increased foreign national anxiety. And what better way, and many of our customers and many of the companies we talk to, what better way to bring down that anxiety and bring peace of mind than to start a green card for an employee? And what does that tell not only your employee but the rest of your employee base about your thoughts and your ideas on the talent strategy and the importance of the talent in your organization? And so we will talk about some of those trends that I discussed around what has changed over the last 12 months. I referenced that Harris Poll study, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. But before we get into that, Allison's going to go over, at a very high level, just a green card overview. For everyone on the call, as you know from the description, this is really about trends and what we're seeing as companies manage this process and what they do to sponsor green cards. However, it is important that you just have a baseline knowledge. If you want a deeper dive, we have tons of webinars on Green Card 101 on our blog that you can see at the bottom of a few of these slides, and we'll give you that final link at the end. So once we talk about the green card overview, we'll talk about talent landscape, which I mentioned, investing through talent through immigration, specifically through the green cards, and then other PERK packages that companies consider. And then Allison will go through a few quick policy updates in regards to the green card. Great. So let's jump right in, and I will pass it over to the attorney in the room to talk about the overview of the green card.
All right. Sounds good. Well, hi, everybody. It's a wonderful, beautiful day in Chicago today, so excited to be here. But let's talk a little bit about green cards, okay? A lot of people on this webinar are at different levels, and so we're going to give you just a basic overview and some basic concepts to think about as you're going through this planning process. And ultimately, although each green card case is different for each individual, and there's lots of different subcategories of different types of green cards, there's always at least a minimum of 3 basic steps. That's the way you can think about it in processing a green card. And first, there's some type of triggering event. The criteria of a particular permanent resident or a particular green card program is met by either the employer or by the employee being sponsored. Step 2, the employer files Form I-140, immigrant petition for alien worker, and there are a couple minority subcategories where sometimes it's actually the foreign national individual applying for the I-140, but that's the vast majority. Not too often does that happen. So most of the time it's going to be the employer filing that Form I-140 immigrant petition for alien worker. So you want to think of that as the employer's petition. There's also the employee's application or petition. So the foreign national is the owner of the adjustment of status application, which is filed inside the United States, if that person is inside the United States, or they complete consular processing abroad. And so, 1, 2, 3, we have a triggering event. Somehow the criteria is met for a particular program. Number 2, we have the employer's petition. Number 3, we have the employee's petition. So again, the event is met. The employer intends to sponsor this person. The employee alerts the government intending that to become a permanent resident. Okay, and so within this 3 different step process, there's also different limiting factors. Okay, the government limits green cards numerically. There's only so many green cards issued per year in the employment-based category. That's 140,000 plus any leftover unused family-based green cards. In addition to that, green cards are also limited by skill level, as well as the foreign national's country of birth. So notice I said country of birth, not citizenship held. The U.S. has decided that we want to remain a melting pot of different nations from around the world, and that is actually prescribed into our laws. So no more than 7% of the total green cards approved annually through the employment-based processes can be approved for any particular country. When we put those 3 different factors together, those are the 3 different things that are really limiting the number of green cards and kind of determine how long a particular person in a particular category is going to wait until they have that green card in their hand. Okay, let's head over to the next slide to talk a little bit more about the skill level. So one of the factors, again, that's limiting how and when people can apply for green cards is the skill level. Now, what we have here are frequently used employment-based categories, EB1, EB2, EB3, EB standing for employment-based. There's also an EB4 and an EB5 that includes special categories like religious workers, victims of crime, investors who invest a tremendous amount of money in the U.S. economy, creating a certain number of jobs. But really, EB1, EB2, EB3 is what we think is most relevant to you on our call today and what we most see in our business here. So EB1 is for people who are top executives or managers of multinational companies. They have transferred to the U.S. For work here in the United States within a certain amount of time, or the other categories under EB1 are for workers of extraordinary ability, people who are one of the best in what they do in the world, or outstanding researchers or professors. I'm going to skip over EB2 for now, but I'm going to skip back in a moment. Looking at EB3s, EB3s is a category that is kind of a catch-all. Okay, it's for people who the employer has attempted to find a U.S. worker to find a position. They have been unsuccessful, and because they have been unsuccessful, they are going to be able to hire that foreign national. But going back to EB2 is a combination of the two. Okay, so some of the categories in EB2 are going to be based on the foreign national's credentials, while other categories are going to be based on the fact that no U.S. worker can be identified. An employer has attempted to recruit one and they've not been successful. So EB2 is split into both of those different types of subcategories. And when we have a situation where an employer has attempted to find a U.S. worker and they've been unsuccessful doing that, they go through a process called a PERM process. That's a recruitment process. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But these are the top three categories that we're seeing: EB1, EB2, EB3. And let's go and let's talk a little bit more about skill level and how these different steps work. Thank you so much for changing that slide. Now, going back, we always have three steps, right? We always have, we're meeting the program requirements, we're going and we're meeting that criteria of a particular program. And if we look at the second, third, and fourth line here, we can see we're meeting the EB1 criteria, right? Where you have someone who is one of the best in the world at what they do, they meet that criteria. Or EB2, okay? So again, EB2 could be non-PERM or it could be PERM, depending on what the subcategory is there. Or we have, it could be a PERM-based program, right? We've tried to find a U.S. worker, and we can't, so we have to go and show the government that we've taken proper amount of recruitment to do that. And because we can't find a U.S. worker that's available and willing to take the position for the rate offered, we're able to sponsor that foreign national. So we're always going to have that first step in there. And then again, if you'll notice, the second step here and the third step, they're going to be the same. It's going to be filing that Form I-140, the petition for alien worker, and then we're going to have the employee's petition, whether that's adjustment of status or through consular processing, where the employee notifies the government, I intend to become a permanent resident. This is something that I want. Okay, and we are calling it the employee's petition because this is really the first place where the employee is actually notifying the government that I intend to become a permanent resident. This is something I want. This is something I desire. Now, let's, of course, in reality, I'm sure you've had that conversation with your employees well in advance, but this is the official notice to the government. So when we're looking at these different categories, what is actually most common, most frequent is this last line, the PERM-based categories. Okay, so that is going to be the most common, where we have attempted to find a U.S. worker for the position and we have been unsuccessful. So we're going to focus on that right now, since this is just a high-level overview today. This slide right here, this shows an overall of the PERM process, right? So we still have these three basic steps. And actually, can we just flip back for 1 second, right? And we're still having that three basic steps, but these are the subcategories under PERM. Okay, let's go back to that PERM slide. All right, so there's multiple steps in the PERM process, and this is something that really people are pretty comfortable with the three steps, but when we start talking about the ins and outs of PERM, that's where things get a little bit more blurry. Your attorney is going to handle this. Your attorney is going to handle walking you through these individual steps, and they're going to ask you to provide certain documentation, certain papers, a job description perhaps to get you through this. But Unfortunately, because not everyone is honest in the United States, the U.S. government actually requires employers to prove that they have attempted to recruit a U.S. worker. It's not enough just to give our word on that. And so we have to take certain steps. And again, there's the law and there's the reality, okay? And the law says we have to take these certain steps to recruit a worker for this position, when reality is the employee's probably already in that position, right? You probably already have a foreign national in the position that's being sponsored, and chances are you're probably pretty happy with their performance, which is why you want to go and you want to sponsor them for a green card. So despite that, we still have to go and do these steps. And so an employee is supposed to be outside of the PERM process, okay? They're not supposed to be involved in this PERM process or recruitment process because there's a conflict of interest there, right? That we are actually recruiting, you're trying to hire someone, a U.S. worker for the job that chances are they probably hold in your company. Maybe they don't, maybe it's something that you expect them to be promoted to in the future, but they stay out of the PERM process for that reason. It would just be a conflict of interest to have them involved in that. But the first step is to go and to have the Department of Labor submit a certification telling us what the prevailing wage is for that particular position. And they do that after an ETA 9141 is filed with the Department of Labor, that it lists where this job is going to be, the geographic location, the job description, and the type of work and requirements for the position. That's how they're going to determine that. The next step is the recruitment period, okay? And so this is when the requirements for the job they're actually advertised. Now there's certain mandatory steps, mandatory recruitment that has to be placed, as well as additional recruitment. So mandatory recruitment includes things like placing an ad with the state workforce agency, consecutive Sunday newspaper ads being run, internal postings, notifying current employees of the position, and a number of things. There's also additional recruitment where a certain number of additional steps have to be chosen off of a list, and depending on your situation, your case, your time of year, and the position offered, your attorney is going to help you choose what's best for you in that particular circumstance. Now, the first two steps here, the ETA 9141, the prevailing wage, and the recruitment period, those two steps can take place concurrently. There's a little bit of risk there because if the Department of Labor comes back with a very high prevailing wage, something that you weren't expecting to pay, the recruitment that you have been doing might be worthless, and that might be a waste of money. But I just wanted to let you know that is a possibility, and depending on your circumstances and your timeline, that might be a good choice for you. From there, after the recruitment period is completed, and the advertisements do have to run for a certain amount of days, depending on what step you're on, we have to wait for at least 30 days for a cooling off period. Why? Because people have to apply for the position, right? We need to give the U.S. workers a chance to apply for the position, and if anyone appears to meet the minimum requirements for that position, then you need to reach out, and there needs to be some interviews. Again, this is going to be, you're going to be directed by your attorney on how this should be done and when this should be done and what steps you need to take and what documentation you need to hold on to, because everything needs to be documented there and certain logs have to be created. After that, we should have a better idea of whether a U.S. worker has been identified or not for the position, and whether someone is available to fill that role. If you haven't found anyone who's ready, willing, able to take the position, then this process is successful, and you're able to go forward in the process and continue sponsoring your foreign national employee. The next step is actually filing the application for permanent employment certification, or sometimes people refer this to as the actual PERM application, ETA 9089, which notifies the government recruitment has occurred, no U.S. worker has been identified who's available to take the position, and here are the requirements of the foreign national employee, the credentials of the foreign national employee that meet the minimum requirements for the job. And that goes to the Department of Labor, and if everything is all set with that, hopefully it'll be certified, and then we can actually go back to that three-step process, the 1, 2, 3, and file the I-140, and then the employee's petition, whether that be adjustment of status or consulate processing. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Allison. As always, you simplify the complicated, but it is complicated, right?
It is complicated. High overview, folks.
Yeah, that was a high-level overview. There are tons and tons of details that go into this, and obviously this is it is a commitment and investment on the employer side. And so why do 70% of employers do this? For their employees, one, of course, is an employee experience and caring about employees and talent management. But at the end of the day, this is business, right? There is a real skills gap here in the U.S. and actually around the world. 46% of U.S. employers report difficulty filling jobs, but actually that bumps up to about 48% of employers globally. These jobs span all different industries, but as you would imagine, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, is by far the biggest skills gap that we have here in the U.S. There's quite a few studies on this. Manpower, Adecco do quite actually very detailed studies around exactly where the skills gaps will lie. But Adecco found that 2.4 million STEM jobs will go unfilled by the end of this year. DOL, Department of Labor, put out a study that showed that 1.4 million shortage of software developers specifically we will have in the U.S. by 2020. And it's not just that. We talked about globally 40 million shortage of high-skilled workers, and so it's not too surprising that international assignments will increase by 25% in the last 10 years, or they did already increase, but they're expected to double by 2020. Layering on that, as we talk about employee experience and talent management, that 71% of millennials want and expect an international assignment. But this function within an organization, the ability to manage this process, get the best people in your organization, no matter where they are in the world, and move them around to where you need them, is mission critical and important, which of course is why all of you on the phone to understand a little bit more about how employers are doing this, when they're doing it, and how they're managing that process.
And really, I think, we provide you a lot of information there because we know our customers want to know that information, okay? But that's not things that you are necessarily responsible for knowing, okay? This should be much less painful. It should be relatively painless, okay, when you're working with an attorney you're comfortable with, okay, right? They should be asking you for certain documentation, certain information. You provide it, and they're going through all those steps. But that's what that process looks like.
Yeah, great point. And even though, to Allison's point, the process can be complicated, obviously, yes, a great partner will sort of demystify that whole process and just walk you through the process. But whether it's a green card, whether it's an H-1B or a TN or any of the other alphabet soup of visas, 53% of employers expect their company's foreign national headcount to increase in the next year. And while another, 59% of employers expect their demand for work authorization outside of the U.S. to increase in the next year. Again, more of just a trend that we're seeing because of the skills gap, because of the critical or the criticality of the talent that is around the world, and how employers can really bring them not only into the U.S. but move them to where they need them. And so that next stat from Immigration Trends just further proves the point that 70% of employers say sourcing foreign national employees is extremely to extremely important in their company's talent acquisition strategy. And so it's not too surprising that green cards then become a really important part of that. And so I just went over the alphabet soup. Here's a great demonstration of that. But I think this is something that Allison and I talk about quite a bit on various webinars and at presentations around the country. But your plan is not a one-size-fits-all, right? We're going to talk about green cards specifically here on this webinar, but there are tons of different options for not only securing work authorization for your employees, but keeping them here. But really just understanding your goals, right, Allison, and how you think about immigration for your employees and their specific situation is all important to consider.
Right, because all of these are individual different paths. Like these are all different pathways someone could take from entering the country on day one to getting a permanent resident, becoming a green card holder, becoming a citizen, or perhaps returning home. There's lots of different ways that someone can do this. And just because your company is generally sponsoring H-1Bs, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best strategy for your company. One size doesn't fit all, right? But we need to balance the immediate needs of the company with the long-term goals of the company and the individual, as well as factoring the needs in of that individual's family, because obviously that's also a dynamic that's always in play here too. It's possible day one to map out these types of things. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. In my experience, that's normally not how most companies operate, right? You find someone, you identify them, you want them for this position, we sponsor them for whatever particular visa is appropriate, and then a couple years down the line, it's like, okay, all right, they're about to expire, we better do something. Okay, well, since we're renewing this, let's talk about this green card. Oh, well, we have some time, we'll put it off, right? That's what generally happens probably with 90% of the customers that I've experienced over my career. And that's not necessarily, it's one way to do it. There's nothing wrong about doing it that way. But it can waste resources, and it's not necessarily strategic. And, even when we're mapping out individual paths for people, that doesn't necessarily have to be something that's shared with the foreign national, right? Because things can always change. But allowing yourself to set that timeline from day one makes sure that you're taking proactive steps along the journey and you're not reactive and rushing.
That's right. And this is just examples of it. Cause you could do like from an L to a green card, that possibility too.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just lots of examples here.
Yeah, great.
I started talking a little bit about how we can have different pathways and how we could be planning everything from day one when someone starts coming into the country, when that foreign national starts working for our company. And I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here where I said every case is different and every situation is different. You're going to see certain patterns and certain trends emerging throughout your workforce. Now, the cases, of course, are going to be different, but these trends and patterns might have to do with what countries you're recruiting from for your foreign national employees. It might have to do with your work that you do. You have a lot of researchers or scientists. It might have to do with the level of experience required, master's degree or higher, or perhaps no degree at all, perhaps high school. And, every company is going to be different that way. But when you start seeing these different trends, you can kind of create a little rubric like this for yourself. Okay, so this is just a sample. This would be foreign nationals from China, okay? And these are different pathways that somebody could take looking over a period of 1 to 7 or more years. And this category right here, or this timeline, is based on the visa bulletin from March 2018. The April one just came out today, but this is based on March 2018. And based on the March 2018 priority dates and what we know from USCIS's processing time, which were just updated yesterday, this is approximately how long different visa types and the H-1B visa and green cards should take for individuals from China in these different categories as of March 2018. That changes in April, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this can be done for any type of trend you're seeing within your organization. And I want to point out the second line and the bottom line with the little dollar sign next to the word China. Those paths right there save you money, right? If we're proactively planning, if we are planning from day one, if we were talking to our employees about their long-term goals and their short-term goals, we are in the position to save our company money, and not just save money in terms of dollars committed to immigration sponsorship, but also your time, your day, the time that your foreign national employee is taking to renew their visa, to collect documents while they're on your dollar, which are all absolutely necessary, but it doesn't have to be done multiple times. If you compare this to the third line, the China EB2 or EB3, right, and in this type of position, which is typical of what we see and how most customers are operating, right, there's going to be at least 2 visa extensions and potentially more, depending on the priority dates and how they're moving. And here, it's just a more expensive pathway. It's a more reactive pathway, and there's nothing wrong with it. This is absolutely fine because there's other business needs that are evaluated when making these strategies. But I just want to point out that this is available, and planning like this is a possibility and a good choice for many employers. Great. Also, we just gave you a lot of information here, and I just want to...
Disclaimer.
That's right. I just want to have my regular webinar. Remember to talk to your attorney, right? So even when we're planning on our own and we're making these charts on our own and we're looking and identifying strategy and trends on our own, we want to make sure that we're not doing this without the advice and counsel of our immigration attorney. Because, again, those charts are changing based on priority dates, lots of other trends. It's been a very more changes than usual have come down over the past year or so, and so even though this is the situation we are today, you want to make sure that you're checking this out with someone so you're not wasting your time and efforts planning on something that might not be possible.
Great. Thank you so much, Allison, for that overview. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how employers are using green cards. So when are they sponsoring? What's the policy around it? Are they paying for the green card? For what part of it? And so we'll talk a little bit about what we found in immigration trends. But here's just a high-level overview of what we typically see from most employers, and we'll talk about the percentages of employers that do what, but do which one. But is it immediately after hire? Is it after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? We also see, and Allison can speak to this far better than I can, but we also see, for what types of roles within an organization will you sponsor green cards, and at what sort of tenure of that employee do you sponsor them? And so there's lots of things to consider in this, and obviously I know, Allison, you talk a lot about this when just thinking about the employer's overall company strategy, right? And how does this play into their overall talent strategy, and being really mindful and thoughtful with a policy that really helps you optimize that.
Absolutely, because we don't want to limit ourselves too much, right? Every once in a while you're going to have that amazing candidate that you just in order to get them, you need to start that green card immediately. And so you do want to have flexibility when you're having and framing your policies that way, because it's going to happen, right? And if you have your policy in there and it's in writing and there's no exceptions to it, you might lose the ability to sponsor that amazing candidate.
Yeah, that's a great point. On the one side of that as well is actually we did a study of foreign nationals a couple years ago, so it's about 2 years old data, but about 70% of foreign nationals said even the fact that an employer has an immigration policy, a green card policy at their organization, actually influences their decision to work for that company over another one that doesn't. So even just having that policy, and to your point, perhaps the vagueness of it will help, is important. So what should that policy look like? So let's look at some benchmarks. So as I mentioned, we do this study once a year with Harris Poll, and there's about 400 employers that respond, as you would imagine, across industry, company size, and the numbers that we've now done this 3 years in a row, which gives us a really nice data set. Some things have changed quite a bit this year. Some things have sort of remained constant. One of the constants is that companies are still sponsoring green cards. This actually surprised me a little bit that it wasn't higher, just knowing actually our company and customer base and how many more companies are sponsoring green cards. But we'll talk about that nuance of that data in just a second. But one of the questions that we always get from employers as they're trying to build out these policies for their organizations is, what are other employers doing? And so this is the national average. We actually have some other data coming out soon. We have a San Francisco specific data set. We have a technology specific data set, and manufacturing that will be coming out in the coming weeks. So make sure that you are subscribed to our blog so that you get those at envoyglobal.com/blog. Quick plug there. But we will keep you updated as we continue to release these different segments of the data. But overall, 35% of employers that sponsor green cards do so immediately. The next sort of chunk is 29% do it after 3 years, and that's really sort of in concert with the H-1B timing of that first visa renewal, or even the second one. And then another good chunk do it after a year. But I think the big point there, 61%, a large portion of employers sponsor that green card in the first year. And so, from a competitive perspective, if your policy is within that 3 years, you are competing with employers that are doing it much faster. And we do know, even anecdotally from some of our larger customers, especially on the West Coast and in the Bay Area, this is becoming a point of recruiting challenge when you, A, don't have a policy at all, but two, are far behind the competition in those areas. So interesting stats from the immigration trends there.
And also, something I just want to mention is that this is, it's really kind of revolutionary. We didn't really see this even 5 years ago, the policies being as frequently as we see them now. Now it's becoming more and more common. Still, I would say the majority of employers don't have a set policy yet, but it's becoming very, very well wide known. They see it as a competitive advantage when recruiting. It communicates your message across all departments. Yeah. It makes it really clear for managers, for recruiters, for executives, just to understand what the expectations are. So as changes come with politics or new laws being put into place, you'll be able to pivot accordingly and just move forward rather than having a potential crisis situation, big long meeting. What do I have to do now?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great point. Every company, should look at this. That's obviously that benefits their organization, their employees the most, but it is important to know what companies are doing. And I know there are questions sometimes like, do they do more than 3 years? So you see there right there after 5 years of service, some employers, but a much smaller amount, do that. So it's really that top tier within that 1 year at 3 years, and then after the 5 years, which would be a second H-1B renewal, right? A much smaller percentage.
More expensive option also.
Yeah, because you're going through, right, 2 H-1Bs plus the green card.
Right.
So, and so here's what I was sort of alluding to in terms of some of the data was a little bit surprising to me that hadn't changed. But here we wanted to dig into this a little bit further, because what we saw, at least in our business at Envoy over 2016, is that green cards were just far more from both the quantity side and also new employers coming on with green cards. And so we wanted to validate that and see what that looked like in the broader market. And so these stats were actually not surprising to us, that 37% of employers, the staggering stat, 98% of employers said that they made some change to their green card sponsorship policies over the last year. And a big part of that, to Allison's point, is really around the changes that have happened over the last 12 months with the current administration. And so 37% are sponsoring more green cards. They're paying for more of the green card process. They're accelerating timeline, and that's probably what we saw the most, is that perhaps they had a green card policy of a year, but they were doing that in the first 6 months or even immediately. And so all just important things to consider as you think about, it's not a set and forget, right, for immigration policies. And so if you haven't sort of brushed that off, if you've had one and you haven't brushed that off in the last year, it's probably a good idea to do so, knowing that other employers are changing theirs.
This 98% have changed their green card policy over the last year. That really surprised me. It really surprised me. Because I hope that just means that people are actually setting more, aspects of their policy, improving it, maybe sponsoring sooner based on this other data we have. I guess that's just speculation and assumption that I'm making.
Yeah, no, they are. That's exactly what they're doing.
Right. Because it seems 98%. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah. So again, it's they're sponsoring, to your point exactly. What have you changed how have you changed your green card policy the last year? We're sponsoring more. We're sponsoring them faster. We're paying more of the green card policy, and unfortunately some are no longer sponsoring green cards, perhaps because of the complexity of it. But yeah, super fascinating and important information, obviously, as you look at not only changing or creating, but importantly changing your green card policy. So let's talk a little bit about some of those nuances of green cards, because this is also a lot of the question that we get from employers. So do you pay for the green card? How much of it do you pay? And so you see here there's about half of employers that are just paying for all green card policies, and that's actually up just a bit. Not necessarily enough to be significant, but 47% are paying for all the green card policies. But then another 40%, yes, are paying for it, but they have a contractual stipulation to pay back part of the fees. Now, there are certain parts of the stages of the green card process that Allison went through in detail before that employees cannot pay for, that is by contract or by law that the employer has to. So you see there, we pay for just the costs associated with the PERM recruitment process, which is what that is speaking to. That is down a little bit from the year prior. And I know I have to put the sort of disclaimer on here, because we always get the question, well, if I'm in Texas, am I allowed to have a contractual buyback period for if we pay for the green card? And I will really bring out my inner Allison to say, it depends. Bring the law school answer. It depends. It depends. It really does on the state, and this is really more in the employment law. So as always, consult your immigration attorney, and actually probably your immigration, your employment law and general counsel for the laws and regulations in your state. And then the final, for those that sponsor green cards, sort of as a business leader's discretion or on performance, there are still a good amount of employers that do so. And I think this is a good example that Allison was speaking to give you flexibility in that immigration policy. So if you don't want to say, yes, everyone we sponsor immediately or after 1 year, or maybe you are someone that sponsors them after 5 years, but there's a performance-based or a case-by-case or a business unit leader's discretion that you sort of involve this in the overall strategy and, more importantly, the policy. And so here's an idea. This is typically what you might see in terms of that payback, and depending on when the employee leaves. So if it's in the 6 months, is it the full cost? Of course, aside from those few stages that the employer is required to pay. In 12 months, is it 75%, 12 to 18, 50%? This is just more of a guideline based on what we typically see. But again, creating a payback period that is most relevant and most impactful for your organization, customized to your own talent strategies, is important.
Also, you want to keep in mind also the law and the regulations also protect employers in this. You might not ever see the consequences of an employee obtaining their green card through you and leaving immediately, but the chances are there would be. At some point, the assumption is that person might be interested in becoming a citizen and have to go through another level of USCIS review to do that. And if it is seen that as soon as that employee, as soon as they got their green card, they left your company or within a short amount of time, that's going to look a little bit like fraud, right? Because there's an agreement between you and the employee. You are going and you are sponsoring this person for this job. If it's a PERM-based green card application, it's a job that you have tried to recruit a U.S. worker for and were unsuccessful, and that's why you're sponsoring this person to fill this job. So as soon as they get the benefit, if they leave, that looks like a little bit of not having a real meeting of the minds, or a bit of a fraud, or just not being truthful in their intents and what they plan to do. And that's something that has put people into deportation and had them removed from the United States. It's a very serious thing. And so that's also, in addition to these collaborative provisions, you do have protection in the law and regulations, although if the employee leaves you might not ever see that. But that's something that employees generally know and are aware of. And before any making of any major moves, they generally do, at least in my experience, consult an immigration attorney and learn about those different aspects.
Great points. Just speaking to all the things that you have to consider when drafting those policies. And I did see a couple questions on which parts of the process do employers have to cover. So you see that there, the government filing fees for the I-140 I-140 and the 485 are those two stages. All right. So I know we are. I want to leave some time for questions. We actually have been able to answer these sort of as we go, as I've been trying to track them. So please post those questions there if you haven't already. And so we talked a lot about green cards, and so part of another big part to consider of an immigration policy is what other PERK packages is your company going to provide to employees, expats, or foreign nationals that are coming in to work for your organization from overseas. And so, paying for dependent visas or green card applications for family members, you see the differences there between 2017 and 2018, because we actually asked this question just in the two most recent studies. There's only a small percentage that don't offer any sort of immigration-related PERK package. 12% that don't do that this year. So a good amount that employers, 83% that do. I find some of these, just really helpful, and I'm always interested as I talk to customers about some of these sort of like out-of-the-box ideas. That cultural assimilation training, I think, is great, and there's great platforms today that can make that really easy. There's also, this is less about a sort of policy, but what services are you providing to spouses, right? So if you move your entire family, including children, to another country to work for your organization, are there spousal supports? I hear companies doing great social networking, social or networking type of events for spouses of employees that are from other countries. So there's lots of different ways to look at this, but I think the creativity is definitely not lost. on foreign nationals as you consider thinking about, what's the best way to get them up and going and productive within a new country as quickly as possible. And a lot of that has to do with just, giving them peace of mind of some of these like everyday things that we sort of take for granted when we've been in a country for our whole life for some of us. So this is, I think, Allison's other disclaimer around being flexible. Right. You've talked about this quite a bit, but I think it's definitely worth repeating.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, just flexible policies, in my personal opinion, are the best, but perhaps, because of past crackdowns with the Department of Labor, USCIS, or other employment-related issues or compliance issues, it's better for you to have a strict policy, talk to your immigration attorney, and do what's best for your company.
Great. So quick policy updates. Actually, most of this has, we've got one that is, I think, hot off the presses today. Yeah. But I know the in-person interview requirement might be on some people's minds because that was a change that happened in October.
Yes, last October. Prior to October 1st, 2017, it was up to the individual officer adjudicating a case, a green card case, whether an interview would be required for the employee and their family members. As of October 1st, 2017, it is mandatory. They no longer have that discretion to waive the interviews. All employees and their family members who are going through the adjustment of status process are required to attend an interview at their local USCIS office. Haven't had too many reports of any stricter requirements or more stringent requirements. Those have been going forward very effectively. Of course, there's always exceptions to that general understanding, but that's a good thing. Another couple other updates. The USCIS processing times. We saw large, long processing times, a major slowdown in 2017. And the good news is in 2018 so far, that trend's starting to reverse itself a little bit, where the wait times on different visas and green card categories are getting a bit more reasonable, a little bit shorter than before, and so they're moving in the right direction. If you're regularly attend these webinars, you've heard me say before that in about a year ago, early 2017 and through the spring, USCIS was hiring a very large number of officers, and I said it would probably take a while to get those officers trained and ramped up and adjudicating cases, and I hope that this is what we're seeing here, where people are actually in their offices, they're adjudicating cases, and the timing is getting a little bit better. Hot off the presses, what Jamie mentioned here, the April 2018 Visa Bulletin is out now, and we are seeing some possibly, depending what your category is and who your foreign nationals are, some major changes. For the first time in quite a long time, we have the EB1 category oversubscribed for China and India. They are not current right now. USCIS is directing us all to look at that final action date on the Visa Bulletin. And if you're not familiar with the Visa Bulletin, this is the document that's issued monthly by the Department of State. You can find it pretty quickly by just even Googling Visa Bulletin, Department of State. It's usually the first couple links on the top of Google. And this is the document that kind of synchronizes the EB skill level categories with the number of applicants from different countries, right? With the numerical limitations, can't have more than 7% of green cards going to any one country. We're looking at the employment-based chart, the final action dates for employment-based preference classes. That's what USCIS is ordering us to look at for individuals who are going to adjustment of status process inside the United States. And we have a lot of applicants in China and India in the EB1 category, so now these are oversubscribed and not current for the month of April. So what that means is if you have individuals going through the green card process in the EB1 category from China or India, you want to reach out to your immigration attorney, and hopefully they'll be able to get your case for that person filed in March, because after April, depending on when that person's priority date is, it might not be a possibility. There might be a bit of a wait there until the priority dates are current and adjustment of status is able to be filed. Also, as of March, the EB3 category for Philippines also has a delay. Right now, as of March, as of April, the priority date is January 1st, 2017, but there's also a delay in March. Okay, so that's not brand new, it was new as of March, but not a major change for April there. EB2 for China and India continues to be oversubscribed. They are not current in that category, but it's been that way for quite a long time, as well as the India and China for the EB3 category.
Great. So that was a ton of information. If you are interested in learning more about immigration trends, I covered a handful of questions from the overall study, but there's about 20 to 30 that we asked overall. So I talked about the benefits, but we talked about quite a few other just hot topics of what's changed, how companies are managing it, and ultimately, how we're benchmarking immigration programs overall. So please check that out. For what many of you are maybe waiting for as well is the continuing education credit. So there you have for HRCI and SHRM. So please take those down. We'll be following up with those as well. Again, a few people had questions on if we're sharing the PowerPoint presentation and the recording. Yes is the answer. So look out for that email prior or post the conclusion of the webinar, and you will receive that soon. The good news is I'm looking through all of these questions. We actually did get to many of them.
Great. Good to hear.
Yes. There are, I will give the caveat that there are a few questions that are very, very specific to a case. It is very much frowned upon to give legal advice over webinars like this. Aside from, broad overviews, which Allison did a great job and gave us a ton of detail. But it is difficult, especially even great attorneys like Allison who have been doing this for years without having every detail of that individual's case and situation and skill set and resume and job posting and LinkedIn. I mean, there's just so many things that you have to look at. And so I will give that caveat. So if I don't get to your question, that might be the reason.
But, feel free, for those individuals that do have those, post-nerd communication center, if you're a current customer, if you're not, you have an email right here in front of you, feel free to use that email to reach out to us. We'll get you to the right person who's able to help you and provide you a little bit more insight and hopefully be able to answer your question.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thank you. And, obviously as a partner, there are a few questions actually. Thank you. I don't know if these are salespeople on here or what, but I did have a question on, can Envoy help us with the standard draft of a green card policy? And the answer is yes. This and just strategy overall is a critical part of hopefully what you're receiving from your partner, and if your partner is an Envoy, you're receiving it from us on a consistent basis, because this is mission critical to obviously running an efficient immigration program in your organization. It's not just, and I'm going to steal this from Allison because she says it all the time, it's not just securing the work authorization. It's not just securing that H-1B or green card in this case, but it's really how that fits into an overall strategy for the organization and making sure that you're getting counsel and advice on all of those.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we talked a little bit more about, let's see, we talked about the oversubscribe. You actually covered that. I think this is more just a high level, but it's a good question. It's difficult to get through PERM recruitment steps for a new employee without the relevant work experience. I'm sure they're thinking of like students that they're trying to get to. Just in general, how do employers think about that in terms of trying to prove that type of
I think
challenge?
If you have someone and you don't have many years or different aspects of experience that's required for a position, a lot of times it depends on what type of year you're applying, whether you're going to be successful or not, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have an entry-level position, the requirement is a bachelor's degree or even no degree. If you're applying during graduation time, you're probably going to have a lot of applicants. That just is what it is, right? If you're applying during graduation, there's a whole class that's graduating that's looking for work. And so you want to keep that in mind. If you have an individual that you want to sponsor for a green card, you might need to sponsor them a little bit sooner than you would normally in order to, to avoid those prime time years where we have thousands and thousands of people looking for positions just like yours. It also depends on whether you're in a major city, whether you're in a rural area, what that workforce looks like. And so that's definitely a challenge. There's sometimes no easy way to get around some of that. But also, depending on what the requirements are for that particular job, maybe it's not a degree, maybe it's not so many years experience. Maybe it's a coding language. Maybe it's looking at what that person actually does on a daily basis and making sure that your job descriptions are actually updated properly to fully describe what that person is actually doing. Not over documentation, not over describing, but fairly describing. Having more is sometimes better, but again, we can't change and we can't alter job descriptions just for the immigration process. Your job description is what it is. We can't be changing it for this purpose.
Yeah. Great. Great advice. So we are actually up into the time, and like I said, I think we did cover most of them. If we did not, to Allison's point, thank you. If we did not cover your specific question, one, we do take a log of this, and we'll be sure to reach out. So you'll probably getting someone reaching out to you to give you a little bit more of that information. Otherwise, as Allison said, post the communication center. That is what it's there for. And as you know, attorney will be getting back to you within an hour. So appreciate everyone's time and appreciate all of the customers on the call. Honored to be your partner in this process and happy to help where we can, whether it's devising a competitive immigration policy for green cards or securing that work authorization for that green card for one of your employees. So thanks so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Allison.